All right, so today we're going to be looking at someone pretty remarkable. Imagine being called, uh, a terrorist one year, and then becoming the first black president of your country just a few years later.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Nelson Mandela's life in a
Oh,
nutshell,
okay.
right? But of course, there's a lot more to him than just that saintly savior image.
Right.
And, you sent over some really interesting stuff from NPR's Throughline
Yeah.
podcast, archival audio expert analysis.
hmm
I'm really excited to kind of dig into all that.
It's a story that I think definitely deserves a deeper look. We often focus on Mandela the icon, but what about the man behind all that? How did his views on violence evolve?
Yeah.
What were the sacrifices that he and his family made? And compromises had to be made to get to democracy in South Africa. That's really what we'll be kind of exploring today.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Mandela wasn't born into the struggle, right? Like a lot of people might assume. He was actually from a royal family
Yeah.
in the Transkei region.
Exactly. And this upbringing steeped in African history and tradition, that's key. Some people argue that it kind of instilled in him this sense of destiny, like a belief in his own leadership potential. But then his world changes dramatically at 23. He runs away to Johannesburg.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he faces the brutal reality of racial prejudice for the first time.
Yeah.
The kind that really ignites a fire in your belly for social justice.
Oh, absolutely. You can almost feel that shift, right? Like where his own personal experiences start to shape this greater purpose.
Yeah.
And it wasn't long after that that he joins the African National Congress,
Right.
the ANC, in 1944.
Right.
Now, initially, their approach was rooted in nonviolent resistance.
Yeah.
Advocating for equality through peaceful means.
Yes, but then apartheid was codified into law in 1948, and that changes everything. This isn't just segregation.
Right.
It's a whole system designed to oppress and dehumanize a population based solely on race.
And it's hard to even imagine the courage it must have taken to live under that system, let alone actively resist it. Mandela, along with other young leaders in the ANC, spearheaded the Defiance Campaign. They were deliberately breaking apartheid laws to show how unjust they were.
Yeah, imagine just walking into whites-only areas and knowing you're going to get arrested, insulted, maybe even attacked all to just expose the absurdity of the system. But, obviously the struggle doesn't end there.
Oh, absolutely not. Then comes the Sharpeville Massacre in 1960. Police open fire on a peaceful protest, and they kill 69 people, many of them shot in the back while they were trying to flee. And this is a real turning point for Mandela. He starts to think that nonviolent resistance alone isn't enough.
It's a chilling realization, isn't it? I mean, that massacre really forced Mandela to confront this very difficult question. Does a cause, however, just ever justify violence? And for him, the answer tragically became yes.
Yeah, and then in 1961, he co-founds Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed wing of the ANC. It's a really dramatic shift toward more militant tactics,
Yeah.
and it's something that people still debate today. Some argue that it was a necessary response to just the brutality of apartheid, while others question the ethics of choosing violence at all.
Mandela himself struggled with this. He said that violence was a tactic, not a principle. But the decision to use it reveals a pretty profound shift in his thinking. And of course, this path puts him on a collision course with the full force of the apartheid state.
Absolutely, and he's arrested in 1962, and what follows is the infamous Rivonia trial in 1964. It becomes this global event. And Mandela's powerful courtroom speech really cements his place as an international symbol of resistance.
His words went way beyond that courtroom. He said, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities." And then he says, "It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die."
Powerful words, and in a way, he did die, at least figuratively. Sentenced to life imprisonment, Mandela spends the next 27 years on Robben Island.
Yeah.
And he endured just unimaginable hardships. But even in the face of all that brutality, he refused to be broken.
Yeah, his spirit, his resilience is really remarkable. He kept this strict regimen of exercise, read tons of books. He even learned Afrikaans, the language of his oppressors. And it wasn't just about survival. It was about strategy, understanding his enemy and preparing for the day when he would be free.
It's really hard to believe. To maintain that level of hope and determination through all of that, it really says a lot about his character. But while Mandela was going through this ordeal, his wife Winnie was facing her own battles on the outside.
Right. Winnie Mandela becomes this powerful symbol of the movement. She's given the title Mother of the Nation. But her defiance came with a heavy price. She had to endure harassment, detention, and torture at the hands of the apartheid regime. So, solitary confinement, being denied basic hygiene, horrific psychological abuse. They used everything they could to try and break her spirit.
It's a stark reminder of the toll that apartheid took, not just on individuals, but on families and entire communities. And Winnie's story, like Mandela's, is full of courage and also tragedy.
It raises some hard questions, too.
Yeah.
How did this constant threat of violence, this reality of living under such a brutal regime, how did that shape the choices that people made? Can we really judge those actions without understanding that context?
It's an important point, especially as we go deeper into this period.
Right.
Because while Mandela and Winnie are enduring these separate trials, the world outside is starting to take notice.
Right, exactly. Throughout the 1980s, global awareness of apartheid just grows and grows. Musicians, activists, politicians from all over the world start demanding Mandela's release and the end to South Africa's racist policies.
And the 1988 Nelson Mandela 70th birthday tribute concert was a huge moment. Broadcast to millions around the world, it solidified his image as a global icon of the struggle against apartheid. And through it all, Mandela refused to compromise on his principles. He refused to renounce violence as a condition of his release, which just made him look even more like a principled leader. But then in 1990, after years of campaigning and negotiations, something remarkable happens.
After 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela walks free. And it's a moment that captivated the entire world. It was the beginning of a new chapter in South Africa's history, the long road to democracy.
And that is a moment that deserves a deep dive all its own. But we'll have to save that for part 2 of our exploration.
Yeah, it was really something. February 11th, 1990, Nelson Mandela walks out of Victor Verster prison hand in hand with Winnie. There's this massive crowd of thousands there to greet him, and that picture of him with his fist raised in the air, that symbol of defiance, it went everywhere. It's just incredible to think about what must have been going through his head at that moment. 27 years taken from him, a country that's still so deeply divided. And yet he just had this, aura of hope and forgiveness. It's amazing.
That's really what made Mandela such an exceptional leader. Even after all that he had suffered, he understood that to build a new South Africa, they needed more than just getting rid of apartheid. They needed healing, reconciliation, a way to deal with the past without tearing the country apart in the process.
And that leads us to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC. It was groundbreaking, but also really controversial. Instead of going for revenge or punishment, the TRC tried to document the horrors of apartheid and offer amnesty to those who committed the crimes in exchange for them telling the whole truth.
It was a bold experiment, to say the least. Victims were given the chance to share their stories, their pain, their losses. And the people who'd committed those acts often, for the first time, had to publicly face what they had done. I remember watching some of those testimonies. Just harrowing stuff. Heartbreaking, but also really moving to see that level of honesty and vulnerability. But like you said, it wasn't without its critics.
Oh, for sure. Some said that it let the perpetrators off way too easy, that real justice means punishment. Others felt that it focused too much on individuals instead of the system of apartheid as a whole.
Yeah, it's a complex issue, no doubt. But the TRC, which was led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, was aiming for something deeper than just punishing people. It was about creating a shared truth, a common understanding of what happened, as a way to build a better future.
And Mandela himself played a big role in shaping that approach. His commitment to forgiveness and reconciliation wasn't just some political tactic. It was a core part of who he was.
It makes you wonder what South Africa would be like if they had chosen a different path, one of retribution and revenge. It's a question that people are still debating.
And it highlights the huge challenges that Mandela faced in leading South Africa's transition to democracy. He became the country's first Black president in 1994. Which felt like the culmination of his life's work.
But as we know, it didn't stop there. Becoming president is one thing.
Yeah.
But governing a country still so scarred by decades of racism, navigating different political groups, trying to lift millions out of poverty. That's a whole other level.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Mandela's presidency wasn't perfect. People criticized some of his decisions, like choosing economic stability over drastically redistributing wealth.
Some argue that because of that, the economic inequalities from apartheid continued, that the white minority kept too much of the wealth and power.
Right. But others point to the progress that was made in things like education, healthcare, and housing under his leadership. Mandela had to walk this fine line, balancing different needs, knowing every decision would have long-term effects.
And his foreign policy is interesting, too. Mandela didn't want to be stuck in the whole Cold War thing. He stayed connected with leaders that the West often saw as enemies. like Fidel Castro in Cuba and Yasser Arafat from the PLO.
He saw the fight against apartheid as part of this global fight for justice and equality. He knew that oppression anywhere threatened freedom everywhere, and that's how he acted.
There's this unwavering sense of principle with him. He just wouldn't compromise on his values, even if it might have helped him politically. We see this throughout his life, before prison and after. But along with all the politics and diplomacy, there was also a personal side to Mandela, one that wasn't always easy to square with the image of the icon.
Yeah, his marriage to Winnie, which was already strained after so many years apart, and the controversies around her actions, it ended in divorce in 1996.
It's a reminder that even these larger-than-life figures are still human, with complicated lives and relationships that are shaped by these extraordinary situations.
And it really underscores how much Mandela and Winnie both sacrificed in their fight for freedom. It's a story of love and resilience, but also heartbreak.
When Mandela steps down from the presidency in 1999, he decided not to run for re-election. It just added to his image as a leader who put the people first. Not his own ambition, but his dedication to social justice didn't end there.
Right, he just kept going, working for peace, equality, and education, using his influence to bring attention to issues like HIV/AIDS, poverty, and conflict. He became this respected global figure, speaking up for those who couldn't.
And when he died in 2013 at 95, the world mourned. Nelson Mandela's life was a powerful example of hope, resilience, and this unwavering belief in a better future. It's a lot to take in, right? I mean, Mandela's journey, activist to prisoner to president to global icon, he experienced decades of oppression, helped guide South Africa through a tough transition to democracy, and came out of it all as this symbol of hope and forgiveness. It's an amazing story, but what does it mean for us? The people left to deal with the world he left behind?
That's the real question, isn't it? Mandela's life wasn't just about ending apartheid. It was about facing injustice and oppression head-on, about how humans can be so cruel, but also capable of incredible compassion.
And it makes us look at ourselves, doesn't it? Like, what are we doing to fight injustice in our own lives?
Yeah.
Are we living up to his ideals? It's a big question, but an important one, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's easy to focus on the big picture, the inspiring quotes, the statues. But Mandela's legacy is more than that. It's a call to action. He showed us that change is possible, even when it seems impossible. But it takes work. We have to constantly challenge the way things are and be committed to creating a more just and fair world.
And he didn't just talk about equality and justice, he lived it. He challenged those in power during apartheid and after. He stood up for those who were marginalized, oppressed, forgotten, and he never stopped learning, never stopped growing as a person. It's really inspiring.
And he knew that real freedom is about more than just not being oppressed. It's about access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity. It's about creating a society where everyone has a chance to succeed. That's the work that still needs to be done, carrying on Mandela's legacy.
It can feel overwhelming, right? Like, how can we possibly live up to that? But maybe it's not about accomplishing some huge goal all at once. Maybe it's about the little things we do, the everyday choices we make to fight prejudice, to stand up for what's right, to help those in need.
I think you're right. Mandela talked a lot about the power of collective action, the idea that even small acts of resistance, when enough people do them, can have a huge impact. We're not alone in this. There are so many people and groups fighting for social justice, and everyone has a part to play.
It's about finding our place in all of this, isn't it? Using our skills and perspectives to contribute to positive change. I know it can be overwhelming to think about all the injustice in the world, but that's why I think it's so important to focus on our own communities, our own circles. Make a difference where we are, one step at a time.
And never underestimate the power of hope. That's what Mandela had even in the toughest times. He believed in a better future, and he got millions of other people to believe it too. That's the legacy that lives on, and it can inspire us to act and work towards a more just and fair world.
Well put. This has been a really insightful look at Nelson Mandela's life and legacy, a complex, imperfect, but truly inspiring man who challenged us to be better, do better, and never give up on the fight for a more just and compassionate world.
And thanks to all of you listening for joining us. I hope this has made you curious and maybe inspired you to learn more about Mandela and what we can learn from him.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep fighting for the world you want to see. That's the best way to honor Nelson Mandela's memory.